We continue with our study on the new religious movements, and should hasten to tell you that the term new religious movements is a relatively modern term that has become widely used to describe various groups or organizations that fit within the parameters that the name suggests. Erin Baker, the scholar, links the use of this terminology to organizations that have evolved from the 1950s who offer some sort of spiritual or philosophical guidance. She suggests, that is Erin Baker, that while there might be a few characteristics that can help to unify these groups, it is frankly absurd to categorize them all within the term New Religious Movement, abbreviated NRM. The problem lies with expecting NRM to be fully accurate in its description. New implies obviously that something is new, but not all NRMs, even though they fit into this term, are new. So that is something we should underline, that even if they are called NRMs or new religious movements, not all of them are new. They are only called new because of the new theological or religious practices that they employ, the uniqueness in religious application in terms of rituals and worship. That, in a sense, could have contributed to the term new religious movement. For example, an Indian NRM, Utopian Response, became popular in the 1950s. So would we classify it as an NRM, though it dates its origin back several centuries? You know, how can you call it NRM? Yet it was Utopian Response, which is one of the Hindu new religious movement from India, and it only became popular in 1950s. But Utopian Response cannot in reality be said to be a recent one, but it is still called new religious movement. So that is one ambiguity we may need to wrestle with when we study these religions. Now in Kenya, see the confusion there is with all these, as we noted in the introduction, that they create some more or less cults, some are more or less creating a lot of dangerous teachings that even encourage killings and faithfulness, some immoral practices. Some leaders are even called gods, messiahs. A lot of very strange teachings in some of these NRMs. But you can also see that there are some very conventional religious groups that are also called new religious movements. Yet they are not cultic. They are not even totally sectarian, though there is some element of sectarianism, the fact that they split from the main ones. They are not unconventional in the sense of teaching unorthodox teachings, but they are only new in the way they practice their religiosity. So this is a very complicated study of new religious movements. It may look like it's a very simple one, but the complexity comes in how you define what is new in these so-called religious movements, new religious movement. James Beckford, contributing in cults and new religious movements, makes the point that most NRMs would hardly be different at all in their operation or moral and social failings than any of the established religions. He agrees that some of the violent and self-destructive acts were carried out by the so-called cultic groups such as mass suicide surrounding the People's Temple in 1978 and the loss of life following the assault on the Branch Davidian compound at Waco in 1993. He makes a valid point in first establishing that the groups mentioned had come out of respectable Christian denominations, and second, in reminding the reader that the atrocities carried out in the former Yugoslavia and Northern Ireland can hardly present the established religions as being blameless. So, in as much as you want to blame the chaotic new religious movements, we have seen, as in the case I've mentioned, the so-called the People's Temple of 1978, the Yugoslavian, the Northern Ireland, all that. They are cases of established religions being found chaotic in behaviors. Let's now look at the typology. Typology is all about types, the study of type, or the organizations they are in. How are they organized? Typologically, what can we talk about these new religious movements? Of course, everyone needs to understand the typology, whether you are a government officer, you are an administrator, because some are leading to terrorism, some are leading to internal fights, some are leading to political manipulations. They manipulate the politics of the area. So you may need to understand their typology so that you can know how to handle them, especially if you are a government administrator, you are a social administrator, you are a leader of society, community leader, and so on and so forth. Brian Wilson's 1973's classification of the new religious movements are within the 7 categories that he came up with. Number 1, he talks of the conversionist response, which insists that individual and collective salvation can only come about through a profound, supernaturally wrought transformation of the self. The second typology is, in Wilson's case analysis, is the Evolutionist Response, okay, which believes that evil can only be overcome and salvation assured by action. Thus, no subjective change, however profound, will affect the state of the world for the better. The introversionist, number 3, the introversionist response, on the other hand, now seeks salvation by withdrawing to a separate, purified community, set apart from what is perceived to be an irredeemably evil world. You see now, the introversionist response, that group, that typology, now according to Wilson, has it that the world is irredeemably evil. No one can heal the world. And so they insist on withdrawal syndrome. You get from the people, get to purify the community. So they have also the concept of purifying the people, perfect people, and the world. Within the irredeemably evil world, they are still perfect people, and you should withdraw, stay apart, cut your dealings with those people. Don't do trade with them. Don't do business with them. Keep off from these evil people. The fourth typology is the manipulationist or Gnostic response. This one seeks salvation and the conquest of evil through the acquisition of the right means and techniques to deal with the problems of life. Number 5, the thaumaturgical response. Thaumaturgical response relies chiefly on miracles and oracles to attain salvation, which is identified as something specific, such as the relief from a particular illness. Number 6, the Reformist Response, which aspires under divine guidance to overcome evil and save the world by transforming existing social structures and arrangements. Number 7, the last one, is the Utopian Response. This one, the Utopian Response, as a typology of NRM, aims to reconstruct the world according to a set of divine principles that, if correctly applied, will result in the establishment of a world without evil. Certainly, Wilson's typology, however, fails to capture the dynamics that come about as a result of cultural diffusion and general societal change. Nevertheless, and as will be demonstrated in this lecture, most new religious movements, especially in Africa, combines the first, the sixth, and the seventh category cited above. Now, another one who gives the typology of NRMs is the famous Roy Wallace in his 1984 publication. And he classifies NRMs into 3 categories. Number 1 is world denying or world rejecting. This one rejects the world or deny the things in the world. Number B, world indifferent. Number C, world affirming. In this case, Africa's NRMs, theological discourses, fall in all the 3 broad categories, just as those of the West. Now, the world affirming group is the opposite of the world rejecting group. They believe the way to ultimate fulfillment is through the individual. Goodness and advancement comes from within. Therefore, there is no requirement to withdraw from the world. It is only necessary to unlock the human potential inside of all humankind. The social structure is not at fault, as with the rejecting group, as the source of happiness or unhappiness is available to everyone, coming from within as it is the individual who has control. Now, the Church of Scientology, founded by Lon Hubbard, 1911 to 1986, the man lived between 1911 to 1986, the founder of Church of Scientology, is a perfect example of a world-affirming group who, through personal development, hope to eradicate problems within the world at large. So they want to say, world should be affirmed. It is good. You just do things. You fix it. It works. Don't say world is bad. You can fix things and make it better. Further, the world accommodating group of religions, whilst having a set of beliefs that are centered around a personal orientation, the basis for worship and ritual is performed through the corrective formal or the corrective format. The remonstration for members of these groups is not against society as a whole, but rather against the religious groupings they consider have lost some of their vitality or zeal. Now, the Charismatic Renewal movement is a good example of a group that would belong within this typology, as its members originated from within an existing religious tradition, but feeling the need for a deeper spiritual satisfaction than what was being experienced. Think of the Roman Catholic Charismatic Renewal movement in the Catholic Church. They are within this world affirming, world accommodating, because they want to argue that we can fix the problems of the world. It is not all lost. Something somewhere can be done. Something can be done. Okay? Okay? So, two key characteristics normally unique to NRMs are the charismatic leader and the first generation converts. Both share a board as they act in unison. As Irene Baker states, new religions are rarely initiated by a committee. She expands on the way that sociologists use the word charisma by saying that the implication is that leaders classed as charismatic possess special, possibly even divine powers, and because of this, the followers are quite prepared to allow the leader to have authority over them. Now, this authority can extend from where they live, what they eat, with whom they have sexual or social relationships. James Lewis makes the point that charismatic leaders are often the reason that members are attracted to any one particular group. He also makes the valid point that whilst followers appeal to the charismatic leader for legitimacy and belonging, the charismatic leaders often appeal for legitimacy themselves. To achieve this, they look to science, they look to tradition, they look to ancient teachings in a search for an acknowledgement of legitimacy. So total devotion to charismatic leaders eventually leads to a homogeneous belief system, as the belief structure would be built on one person's ideas. As the group develops, the teachings of the leader become open to a greater interpretation, possibly leading to existing members leaving. The death of the leader could have a greater significance to the group than his influence at its inception. Now, if you are in Kenya, you can remember the death of Bishop Mlima of the gospel outreach, when they almost refused to bury him. And President Moi had to intervene in 1980s to tell them, bury him, he's dead. Because this is a man who was telling people who are sick, wake up, and they would wake up. He had the charisma of healing. Okay, and now he's a man, they think he couldn't die. Now, when we come to Africa itself, we can think of typology of charismatic movement in Africa. In his article, Charismatization of the Mainland Churches in Ghana, Cephas Omenyo gives 5 categories as follows. African independent churches originating in Ghana or from other African countries such as Musamandisco, Crystal Church, Arandura churches, etc. Number 2, classical Pentecostal churches, which began in the West in the 1901 and appeared on the Ghanaian religious scene in the 1920s, such as Christ Apostolic Church, the Church of Pentecost, Assemblies of God. Number 3, the neo-Pentecostal or charismatic stroke evangelical non-denominational fellowships. For example, Full Gospel Business Men's Fellowship International and Women's Anglo Fellowship International, and so on. Number 4, the charismatic renewal movement within the mainland churches. That is the Bible study and prayer group of the Presbyterian Church of Ghana and the Catholic Charismatic Renewal Group. Okay? And the last typology of charismatic movement in Africa in a Ghanaian scholar's perspective, Professor Omenyo, is the new Pentecostal charismatic churches or ministries. For example, it cites Christian Action Faith Ministries, the International Central Gospel Church, and so on. Omenyo goes on to show, Omenyo goes on to show the various charismatic renewal movements in Africa, that display NRM traits. This cuts across the charismatics in the mainland churches that predates the neo-Pentecostal phenomenon that began in the West in the 1960s. There are times when these charismatic renewal groups are formally recognized by the national churches, local churches, and the conventional society. There are times when they are held with a pinch of salt. Such variations are driven by the general conduct of the individual charismatic or renewal group. Characteristically, they have a renewed sense of the authority of the Bible, strong Christocentrism. They also have emphasis on pneumatology, healing, and deliverance from evil spirits. They also have contextualization of theology and a renewed emphasis on mission and